Hello, everyone. I'm Sam Eckmann of Gold Derby here with Jason McCormick, the cinematographer behind Feud, Capote versus the Swans. And this is not the first Ryan Murphy show you've worked on before, but I don't believe you've collaborated with Gus Van Sant before. And he has such specific aesthetics, I feel like, to his projects. So what were the conversations like? How did you two kind of land on a look for this series?
Well, actually, I my first film in the industry was 2001. I did a film called Jerry, where I drove the truck and I was a loader for Gus Van Sant.
Oh, nice.
Then a couple years after that, um, I was a second AC on a film with Gus Van Sant called Last Days. And then a few years after that, I was a first AC on a film directed by Gus Van Sant. A couple years after that, I shot a sizzle reel with Gus for a film that didn't work out. And I've kept in touch with him uh, off and on throughout the years since day one.
Nice.
So
So
it's not my first
not first time, but
collaboration with
maybe
Gus.
first time in this capacity, perhaps.
First time in this capacity, yeah. So it was, it was. It's kind of like coming from my home, him and
Mhm.
Harris, Chris Blauvelt. It's my cinematic family. So the initial call from Gus about the project with Ryan, who I just worked with on Dahmer, it just sounded amazing to me because I love them both. Um, and the idea of them collaborating was really inspiring to me. Like what's this world going to look like? Because I know going into it with Gus, you know, you're working with an artist who happens to uh, participate in the craft of being a director. So it's always going to be um, I don't know. I always came away feeling like a fuller person from working on the projects with him in the past. So knowing that I was going to go into it with him in this capacity, having witnessed it from every different level, was really exciting because you're like, okay, now I can finally put some of these pieces together, and it was very much about that as much as it was doing the work, like doing the project. That was part of the experience, but a big part was also just working together after 24 years in the business um, was really exciting, as well as the amount of freedom that Ryan gives us, and the script was so good, and the locations and our production designer and our costume design, everybody just like such a I don't know, just had really good energy going into it. I don't know if that was the question or the answer.
That's okay. That was great. Um, when I look at, when I think of the visual aesthetic and language of this series, there's often kind of this softness over the images that kind of for me pulls me into that time period of the show. What am I seeing there? How did you get that effect?
Hmm. Well, I mean, the effect of the softness, I suppose, just has to everything to do with like, you know, the period and the locations, being in an interior like Lacote Bass and seeing images and seeing the references and looking at so many photographs. Gus is really great about bringing inspiration. Um, we um, we referenced a lot of films. We discussed a lot of films. We just had lots of conversations, and some of the early work of Bertolucci and Storaro were really they kind of came up to the forefront, and Last Tango in Paris. But I don't know. To be perfectly honest with you, I feel like the it wasn't like that's like, oh, we're gonna make it intentionally like that. I think it just kind of evolves into that a lot to do with, you know, um, the locations and the style that the lighting would be in these places. Um, and I think the story and the subject, all that lends itself to this delicate kind of um, elegant, thoughtfulness, naturalism, beautiful
Mm,
naturalism, I guess. You're leaning into that as opposed to a project I'm working on now, which is more ugly pretty, leaning into the ugliness, but still based in naturalism. So I guess it just kind of goes with the subject matter and it just felt right. But it wasn't like, okay, let's do this. I think it has a lot to do with like looking at a lot of things and just kind of coming to um a common point of view, a common aesthetic, a
mm,
common taste and sensibilities. Like, do you think this looks nice? Yes. Why? And understanding what was. We looked at a lot of old like Vogue photographs of the Swans, um, and so it just kind of drifted into that.
mm. Well, there's a really beautiful shift in episode 3 where we go to Truman Capote's infamous black and white ball. And the filming goes into black and white and almost becomes kind of documentary style. Can you talk about the making that shift and what the setup was, what the inspiration was behind that?
Well, it was very much to try to, I think within the script from the initial conversation with Gus is he wanted to make a 16 millimeter um, black and white documentary as the Meisel brothers would in that era. They would have been the ones to make it. Um, so that was the cornerstone to the whole piece. And then thinking in terms of like not me making a documentary, but a Meisel brother making a documentary. So you have to, I suppose, emulate something that, in all honesty, I wasn't like intensely familiar with. But Gus showed me a couple references, but it was also just an idea of what that would be. Um, and we did some tests. Of course, shooting black and white was the idea. So I figured might as well get a black and white camera because then there's no turning back. Plus, it's a small camera with the red, and there's some advantages to having a monochromatic camera in terms of sensitivity and um, I think like I don't know. I think in good hands you could probably make them both very close, but there is a little bit of difference if you side by side them, which
Mm.
of course a sane person wouldn't do that. you know, Not going to watch two images at once and say that one looks better. But through testing and uh, beating it up and playing around, we kind of made our own little digital 16 millimeter zoom, shot a 16 millimeter section of it. Um, we made our own little documentary camera. And then through playing around, Gus really liked the idea of having a light mounted on it. So now you're kind of like free. And of course we would light things when we needed to, when it was appropriate. But there was plenty of times where you just had this camera and you could just tell the story and maybe it's on a tripod, maybe it's handheld. And so many the way the script's written, so many of it's just these vignettes into a moment. So maybe this moment is composed. Oh, maybe this moment has a lot of movement. This moment you're caught and the person doesn't want to be in the documentary. So it was playful, like each one. And keep in mind, we were also working on the rest of the project. So it wasn't like a continuous thing where certainly we had like the black and white ball was like its own day, the days that we did that. But the rest of the scenes were we'd be shooting something else. And then you'd get to go into this world that was kind of totally much more free and playful. So I think that it was just fun, it was just a fun
Mm.
world to live in and to jump back and forth. And I think we Gus was always, he's not one to just like sit back. He's always pushing. He's always he's always trying to find the best version of whatever it is we're doing, whatever the scene is. And each scene is kind of tailored in a way. And you have a language or a style or things that kind of evolve, like a softer look or certain lenses that you kind of land on. All that's getting figured out as you go. But the approach to it was fresh. So you could go from something where we were figuring out this thing that's really technical, and we were kind of within, I didn't want to say limitations, but we certainly weren't just going to all of a sudden go handheld and run around and zoom. I mean, we tried and it didn't work. It didn't, you couldn't carry over the stuff that we were enjoying doing episode 3, couldn't carry over. So it was just fun to jump into that world. And I think when we did, it was always, like a jolt to serotonin. It was fresh.
It's interesting thinking about, as you said, the kind of naturalism in this world, and yet I think Robbie's script also allows us to go to these places where, you have Jessica Lange's character showing up as the mother who's not really there. There's a whole episode where he imagines James Baldwin coming to his apartment and spending a day with him. From your perspective, if you're in this world of naturalism and beauty, is there something different you do when there's that moment of maybe surrealism or imagined atmosphere?
I mean, we did play around, particularly by the time you get to the end when it's in episode 8. The look evolves. Um, I think I think sometimes the things that in the surrealism, or something that may be a fantasy, sometimes it's just less is more, in my opinion. Where maybe it's just a bend on the reality enough to where you feel off or something's not right, and then the payoff is more intuitive as opposed to direct and blunt. Um, but yeah, I mean, certainly, it's an opportunity anytime you get into something that's in somebody's mind or a fantasy or didn't never happen. I think in the black and white ball with Jessica Lange, and he's doing a waltz, you know, there there was no presence of those lights in any of the other footage. There was no sense to their placement, but theatrically, because it's a fantasy, which in turn could be theater, you can start to bend the rules, even if it's just with lighting, just little things. It's just an opportunity, I guess. Doesn't mean you always have to take it.
Hmm. How long do you have to kind of make a game plan and make all these decisions for a show like this? What is the timeline like?
Like how long do we have to prep, you mean, or how long like
Yeah,
for
it
like
just
a
seems
moment?
like there would be so much to take account for. How long is the prep period?
I mean, the prep period is varies from production to production. Something like this, I think, I kind of, you lose track a little bit. It starts off as a conversation. You're going to have like 6 weeks of prep, and then, oh, you're kind of going out for this week, or you're doing a little bit extra, or, things push, things move around. But, there's a substantial amount of time to prep for the most part. On this particular project, we definitely were prepared. We know the locations, but like going back to the scene I was referring to, that happened in the moment of the shoot day. That wasn't really necessarily planned. It was like reactionary in a moment. Let's try this. You know what? Throw a light up there, put it in the dimmer, and let's just go. And it worked. And you gave a lighting cue, and it was just like, so you're in it. But I think with Gus, and I think now again, because I come from that kind of circle, I'll say it's definitely one of the bigger takeaways for me is and it evolved, from working with Harris and his approach to things. But working with Gus, the big takeaway is, I really just want to understand the environment that you're going to go into. what are the possibilities of the space? And once you have that kind of narrowed down, and we're basing it in naturalism. So I'm not making Blade Runner where I have to maybe create or augment or take it into a different thing, or there's different motivations. It's based in naturalism. There's candles, there's lamps, there's, what are the sources? The moonlight, the sun. So I think um, I think you take that all into account, and you have a good plan with your crew, and then you need to be ready for the magic. So I've been really, really lucky to work with some really great crews over the last few years. And of a lot of it is just like, okay, we know the space. This is the plan. We have a truck full of toys. You know, now let's see what the actors do and let's react to it. Certainly, there's things that you have to plan, technically in advance. But the amount of prep, I think it's like for certain things like a stunt, Demi Moore rifle sequence, we had to talk that through more than maybe we even needed to. But so much of it is just like understanding the material. You have that. Okay, we understand that together. Cool. This is the place we're going to do that scene in. Okay, cool. The day or night? Day. Got it. Okay, cool. So what do you want to do? It's people walking around, sitting, talking in rooms and different locations. So I think the naturalism in that is like, how do the actors, how do the space, how are we responding to it in that moment to find the naturalism in their performance, and then the camera just folds into space, folds into the place it needs to be.
Hmm. Since you are kind of being ready for the magic to happen, do you feel like there's a certain style or something that kind of defines your aesthetic with cinematography, or does that kind of change with each project?
I don't know if I could be like, um, that's not, I feel like that's not for me to say. And I would hope that it's not easy to define. I hope that it's simply identified as like good work and fitting, the projects, elevating them, taking them to their best potential. Um, I don't think I can't, I know I don't, I can't really think of like, I really just honestly just trying to do dope shit, just trying to do, um, thing you're inspired by the work, and then I feel like there's there's a pocket where just the analytics get in the way, and it's not something that is even like something that you're describing. It's like thousands and thousands of hours dedicated to looking at dope shit, trying to understand what what it is that moves you, what's the common thread in that, and then when you're given the opportunity to perform your craft that you've dedicated so many years to, you're hoping that the your mind isn't in the way, and that you're just going right to what feels right. It's like a flow state. So I can't imagine like what that style would look like, but that's what it is.
Hmm. Well, it was incredible work with Feud. So thank you so much, Jason, for sitting down and discussing it with me. For everyone watching, make sure you stick with us the rest of the season at Gold Derby. And Jason, thank you again.
Thanks, dude. Nice to meet you.